Okay, good morning. So, following on from yesterday, we have now seen 3 separate tshuvas from Rav Waldenberg, which, let me just find my place here, which really leave us in with not a huge amount of clarity. To recap, we have the tshuva from 1967, a tshuva from 1970, and a tshuva from 97, and it is somewhat challenging, to put it nicely, to be able to build a coherent halachic position from these 3 tshuvas. What is fascinating to note, and we're going to look at this a little bit today, is that a number of later poskim, halachic authorities of varying levels of stature, kol echad lefi kvodo u'mahalalo, seem, when they quote Rav Waldenberg, they seem to do so in a selective manner, both in terms of the number of tshuvas they quote and in terms of their understanding of it. I actually reached out today to a Rav, a halachic authority in his own right in England, very well known there, Reb Chaim Rappaport, who wrote a paper on this in 94, I believe. I have to check, and I've asked him for a copy of it, which hopefully he's going to send me, because I couldn't find a copy of it online. And I'm also going to then, I did it partly in order to be able to open a dialogue with him as well, because I'm not sure whether he published this thing before or after the 3rd tshuva of Waldenberg. I need to double check. Either way, what we're going to do now is we are going to, give me a second, let me find my place here. We're going to look at 2 or possibly 3 approaches to in interpretive approaches of Rav Waldenberg's tshuvas. Okay, so there is a sefer written by Professor Avram Steinberg, Talmud Chacham, Poisek in his own right, very close to many of the Gedolim. It is Encyclopedia Hilchatit Refuit, right? And I actually have a photocopy here. Well, I have a copy for myself, unfortunately. As we say, the technical problems still persist. As soon as the copier is working and the printer is working again, I'll give you handouts on this as well. And in the Encyclopedia Hilchatis Refuis Chelek Hey, Omud 349, he has various quotes, and he quotes Rav Waldenberg as follows. And I quote. So we're on page, if you've got if you have the electronic version in front of you, we are on page 20, towards the bottom. Emdato halo brura shel Rav Waldenberg hivta basis lemachlekes le'i behirut rabba. This has contributed the apparent, we have to be careful. Rav Waldenberg was a big Talmud Chacham, and of course he knew what he meant. The question was, are we able to intelligently decipher and construct a consistent halachic narrative, a perspective, a stance from these 3 tshuvas? So, the lack of clarity, the apparent lack of clarity, has led to Machlekes and Ibehirus Rabbah. Good morning. Professor Avram Steinberg, who is the editor of the put together the Encyclopedia Hilchos Refuos, he writes the following, quote, the poskim have argued about the status of somebody who undergoes what used to be called SRS, today it's called GRS, I think, gender reassignment surgery, right? There are those who have taken the position that it is all entirely dependent on external, physical, biological phenomena. Yes? Genitalia. And on that basis, a slight and a possibly somewhat dubious leap to take it forward, but because then that means we're not distinguishing, as we mentioned yesterday, between artificially constructed and quote-unquote real, natural genitalia. But if the halachic status, the gender of a person, is determined by the external biological phenomena, then they would hold, the poskim would say, that once I no longer have those and I have in its place the genitalia of the opposite gender, then they become the other gender. On the other hand, there are those that hold okay?
Where exactly are we?
Pardon?
Where exactly are we?
We are now on the top of page 21. Okay? So this is actually, it's actually a slightly different quote to what I said to you before, because if you look down here in note 57, it's Encyclopedia Hilchatit Revuit Krach Dalad Omud 611. Right? And I was quoting to you another one, which was Krach Hey Amud 349. And never forget, we always, and I think I understand why, because there in Krach Dalad, the one that's quoted here, he seems to be dealing with the situation post facto, right? I've had the operation, now what? Who am I? There is, of course, there is a first halachic hurdle that needs to be overcome and needs to be resolved, and that is, am I allowed to undergo such surgery in the first instance? And I need to keep repeating this and reminding ourselves of the various, remember these are two always separate issues. Now, whoops, I just lost my place here. So, go back, we're at the top of page 21. Behe'arat hashulayim. המפנה למי שמחזיק בעמדה זו מוזכרת תשובתו השנייה של רב ולדנברג בעניין התינוק שאיבר און מן החצי כשל נקבה אך הג'נוטייפ הוא כשל זכר. Is in the notes there, Rabbi Dr. Professor Steinberg has drawn our attention to the position of Rav Waldenberg. Kolomar, Steinberg haven es emdas Rav Waldenberg k'mi shemakir b'kach shemin shel adam nikva al pi hagenitalia hachitzona. He is quite convinced that at the end of the day, Rav Waldenberg's position is that the gender of a person is determined solely and exclusively on the basis of external genitalia. Even if he does accept the concept of such surgery. And this is emphasized further on the basis of the uvda shel achar mikenu kosev sheyesh hasvurim, because he then, it is evident that this is what the way he perceives Waldenberg's perspective. Why? Because he then goes on to say, by quoting the opposing view, shenituach chitzoni l'shinoi yamin einan meshane dova. So, in other words, he puts the two in contradistinction to each other. So these are the two opposing views. So he totally understands the view of Rav Waldenberg to be external genitalia. Don't need to look any further, both metaphorically and physically. Done. Rav Yigal Shafran, Chelek Harav Azu b'divrei Rav Waldenberg, v'savur shebetos yisayda. Rav Yigal Shafran, who is an ethicist, Rav, also he argues on that understanding in Rav Waldenberg, and he says, "Okay, in Rav Waldenberg say v'sheish matzavim behem nitin l'shanas esamin kavanosi l'tinik shnei ledim simonim kfulim al smach davar v'yesheto likvoin ba'ifim goyrev shemini shel adam nikal smach mariyah chitzoni." He says there are people who have mistakenly extracted and understood that Rav Waldenberg's position is that it all is determined exclusively on the basis of external genitalia. Ulam domani shediuk ze einoi nochoin. Rav Waldenberg shlita klaloi dibar b'misha hichlet miyuz mosel afachis minoi. He says Rav Waldenberg never discussed a case where somebody electively chose to change their gender. And you can, there is additional support for this perspective, this interpretive perspective of Rav Waldenberg. Mina kevel azocha b'derech neis dinik androgenous. And then he quotes the 1997 tshuva, the one that we saw, the third tshuva. He says, you see that you end up being an androgynous. So it ain't so simple. So it is overly simplistic and incorrect in Rav Shafran's view to depict Rav Waldenberg as being of the opinion that it's all on the basis of external genitalia. Kain yesh l'tzayin. So here we however do need to point out that Rav Shafran, who's quoting the 1997 one, does lo mityaches klal lediyuno ha'hilchasit shel Rav Waldenberg which has 1967. He doesn't mention the first tshuva, and therefore doesn't feel even the need to resolve. So shaharei b'tshuva, because in the first tshuva mudubar b'ishtanus tivis, we're talking about some sort of natural, whatever it means, or whether it's true or not, or whether it is actually irrelevant. But this is the way he's relating to it, is a phenomenon presented to him as being a natural gender change. Ubechol zeis kevesh am Rav Waldenberg, that given that now this person presents themselves only with one set of external phenomenon, that's it, game over. So we've got a problem. Bottom of the page, Umas Harav Shafran, Mityaches Harav Rappaport, and I mentioned this just before you came in, Kobe, that Reb Chaim Rappaport Shlita, who is a Rav in London and a serious Talmud Chacham and a Pesach, gets involved in all of these things. He's written a fascinating book called Judaism and Homosexuality, which I have. Very interesting. Who I know him pretty well. Lives in Edgeware. So I've reached out to him actually for a copy of this tshuva that we're going to quote now. I reached out to him and hopefully he will send it to me because I couldn't find it online. Umas Rav Shafran, mityaches Rav Rappaport, but shuvas sheila im niten, here's the sheila that Rav Rappaport was dealing with. Im niten legayer isha transit. What does one do? Should one be megayer a trans woman who underwent this surgery whilst a Gentile? So he only relates to the first tshuva of Rav Waldenberg. Rav Rappaport relates only to the first one. V'savar, and he is of the opinion, he understands Rav Waldenberg wants to equate gender reassignment surgery to somebody who naturally moved from being a male to a female or the other way around. And he writes, here's the quote, He wants to connect them. Interesting. He understands Rav Waldenberg as being mefalpel, right? And getting engaged in the cut and thrust of halachic discussion, like a lomdish shir backwards and forwards. But ultimately he isn't machriya. So Rav Rappaport, b'nigud l'Rav Shafran, understands that which is brought in the name of Rav Palaji as a way to compare these two phenomena. Natural change, or whatever that means, and manipulated, mechanical, surgical change, as if there's no difference. Nevertheless, he says at the end, quite strangely, he says, Rav Waldenberg lo yichriya b'dava, which is a strange thing to say, because if you look in the tshuva, it would appear that Rav Waldenberg does actually side with Rav Palaji. That's another one. Now, then we have another thing. There is let me introduce you, and Chabal, I should have maybe brought in a chelik here, and that is, there's a very important sefer from Rabbi Avraham, Sofer Avraham, right, who was a Talmud Muvik of Reb Shlomo Zalman and of many of the modern poskim, and he wrote a very important multi-volume work called Nishmas Avraham, right, which is, you can see down here, note 61, Rav Avraham, Sofer Avraham, Sefer Nishmas Avraham, Hamachon al Shem Dr. Falk Schlesinger, Lechiker HaRefuah Al Pi HaTorah Liad HaMerkaz HaRefu'i Shaarei Tzedek. Okay, and you can see actually it gives you the quote, Hebrew books, you can look it up, you can download it. So it's a very important multi-volume work, Nishmas Avraham. I have one or two halakim of it. I perhaps should get my hands on the rest. It's very useful. Anything to do with refuah, Shabbos, Macholes Asurais, all the different ways that refuah and inyone refuah impact. So it's an encyclopedia. Nice. It's an encyclopedia. It contains many original reported conversations with Rabbi Yashiv, Rabbi Shlomo Zalman, etc. It's a very important sefer. Okay, so he says, let's see how he takes to Rav Waldenberg. So far we've had Rav Yigal Shafran, Rav Chaim Rappaport taking it different ways. And let's see what he says. He understands Mefarish Semdosish and Rav Waldenberg b'Tshuvosei Harishoina ke'emda she'eino geireses sheshinem in amlachuti achen shina b'poil mibchina ha'hilchatit et minoi shel adam. Well, let's see. What does that mean? Let's look at the actual quote. Quote, V'agav, olai l'tzayin, she'ein adiyun kan misyaches la'oisam anoshim, she'im zchorim in mekevis b'vado'us, גם לפי מבנה האיברים החיצוניים והפנימיים, וגם לפי הפרשת סוג ההורמונים והכרומוזומים. Rav Waldenberg's tshuva is of no relevance whatsoever, says Rav Avraham, for somebody who is absolutely male or absolutely female and wishes to undergo gender reassignment surgery. This tshuva has absolutely no relevance to us in these cases. For somebody who is absolutely male or female, but for psychological reasons, gender dysphoria, whatever you want to call it, they feel they're trapped in the wrong body, etc., that they wish to change it. Kiboror, listen to this is a quote, fridge magnet time. Kiboror, she'ein behisnahagus ha'odam unetiyosav bilavad, it is evident that a person's behavior, a person's inclinations, their psychological state of mind does not meet the threshold in halachic terms to enable us to get involved mechanically, surgically to change their gender. So you see what he's done? He's done something actually, it's a slight, let me point out to you, a halachic sleight of hand. He's moved from Rav Waldenberg, who's dealing with a post-facto situation, and then dealing with the determination of gender post-facto. He's actually sidestepped it. And he may well be right. I think there's a lot of cogency in his argument. He's saying, you cannot then compare that. You cannot derive license from that to a case of somebody who is definitely male or female and wishes for, maybe compelling and important, but wishes to reassign, change their gender. You cannot derive any support for a position as to undergo either. He's saying two things really: to undergo such surgery, or as to whether it would be effective. You see what he's done here? It's really quite important. And the author of this paper says, what does he mean when he says that it is ein b'hisnagus ha'odam kedei letapel? Does he mean that there are certain conditions that need to be met, and what they are? And what has the tshuva of Rav Waldenberg from 1967 got to do with these things? It's no connection. It could be that's just talking about some sort of natural phenomena. Mm-hmm. So we're really stuck. Go to the next paragraph on the next page, and this is something I actually discussed with the author of this tshuva last week as well, Rav Evers, who I'm sure you all know, right? Mm-hmm. So Rav Evers b'tshuva she'eina metuarechet. It's an undated tshuva. I'm actually going to ask him what the date was. Nidrash lahachriya. He was asked the following question in Amsterdam. You can look down here in the notes. Rav Evers He was a Rav Kehler, note 63, Rav Kehler in Amsterdam. He's written a multi-volume Sefer Tshuvas Shav V'Rofa, and this is a Tshuva in Chelik Beis Siman Tes. It was published in 99, but it's undated, so it's not clear whether it was written. In fact, I'm going to ask him, was it written? Now, the date of writing it is going to be really important, because we now know that it would be interesting to know. In fact, I'm going to ask him straight. I'll message him later today and ask him, did he write his tshuva after having seen Rav Waldenberg's third tshuva or not? because it's undated. Okay, but either way, let's have a look at what he says. He says as follows. What was the shaila that was asked of him whilst he was a community rav in Amsterdam? The shaila was asked as follows. He was asked to decide im lekabel lekehilosoi transsexualis shechozra b'tshuva. A transsexual who became religious, newly observant, chozra b'tshuva, and wanted to be accepted as a member of the kehillah. So one is a communal policy issue, which may well have halachic import, and the other one is the person wants to know, now that they are observant, what is their status? Do they put on tefillin? Do they, which side of the mechitza do they sit, etc. Kabosis lediyunai hahilchati, as a basis for his halachic discussion, he refers to the first tshuva, 1967 tshuva. He understands that Rav Waldenberg was talking exclusively about some sort of natural phenomenon. He seems to understand that it goes together with that of androgynous. The very thing which is going to apparently either change his mind or create some level of uncertainty in the third tshuva of Rav Waldenberg. If we're going to understand that there's no difference between natural, that's the brackets here, if we're going to understand there's no difference between a natural process and a surgical process. So he's quoting the 1967 tshuva, and he understands that it's only talking about a natural phenomenon, and therefore he then extends it to being like an androgynous. Achloi b'tshuvazu. 1 second, just a second again. It just skipped a page for me. Let me find it. Achloi b'tshuvazu. Next, sorry. Where's it gone? Here we go. Zeus mishum androgynous is a suffix zach and a suffix nekeva. Therefore, you can't just say that with an androgynous that the kiddushim just merely disappear. Because you surely would have to require a get me suffix.
There was never a kiddushin with someone who's from the onset of suffix.
But there could be. If an androgynous is mekadosh a woman, what's the halacha?
Can't.
Who says? Let me challenge you. Why do you say that?
Because he's not Zohar.
He's a suffix Zohar, suffix Nekeva.
So
Androgynous is a suffix, at least according to one opinion.
If an
androgynous is a suffix Zohar, so the Mishnah, he's a suffix Zohar, suffix Nekeva. That means we have to, that's why we place upon him, her, not sure what to say, what the pronoun is, but we place upon the androgynous the chiyuvim misafek lechumra of both. The chiyuvim lechumra. But therefore, if an androgynous was mekadesh a woman, we would require a get misafek, because maybe he's a zachar, in which case he is able to be mekadesh. Sorry?
I remember. But if he's a suffix nekeva, he's not even able to mekadesh a woman. How is this possible?
Hence, it's a suffix. You're absolutely right. If he's in a cave, that is says it on the tin, suffix. Therefore, we make him give a get misafek, meaning lechumra. There's a whole nusach for it. How do you give a get misafek? Al hatzad that he is a zachar, then it is a good kiddushin, which means to dissolve it, we need a get. So to get misafek. We very often, by the way, learning Hilchas Gittin, so I'm into the sugi a little bit. There are a number of situations where we are not sure. I can give you one example. When there's a shaila, for example, there's a shaila sometimes in certain names. Names is one of the biggest sugyas in Gittin. Yes, all the different names, because we have Jewish names, we have non-Jewish names, and how they're written, how they're spelt is a massive topic. There are svarim this thick just on the spelling of names, and sometimes, not very often, but sometimes in halacha, the Gedolei HaPoskim feel unable to satisfactorily resolve the shaila, and we will sometimes give two gittin misafek. And in this regard, go on, what did you want to say?
No, I think it's very interesting that we even that we allow to give to be Mekadesh if it's only...
I didn't say we allow. Nobody said anything about allowing.
Oh, so
the Rav doesn't stand there and say...
We're talking about the case...
It's happened, of course, yeah. He was Mekadesh and Isha.
Okay,
There were two Eidim there. Yeah. It's a bit like, there's so many other cases. By the way, just, I'll lighten the tone a little bit. Tell you a story. I don't know if I've told you this story before. Did I tell you about the Noda B'Yehuda and the Chulgit? No. Did I not mention it? It's awesome. So I came across this 6 months ago in the course of my learning, my limud, in a Pischei Tshuva in Hilchos Gittin. He brings, I would just want to say this as part of the gadlus of the Noda B'Yehuda, right? The Noda B'Yehuda in his time, chief rabbi of Prague, one of the greatest poskim of his dor, if not the greatest, in a golden era, So the Noda B'Yehuda writes as follows. He writes that it doesn't matter what the detail is, but there's a case where he feels that misofek you have to give 2 gittin. So he says, this is what I do. We write the first get, the first way, and then I call back the sofa and the Eidim and the husband and the thing, and I say, I'm so sorry, I've made a mistake. To'isi, I've made a mistake. We did it wrong. We need to do a new get this way. And he writes a second get with the different. Why did he do that? He did that because there is a potential halachic problem, something that's called, I don't know whether you've come across the sugya of yesho ein breira b'da'oraisa, which means, I'll keep it very, very simple. We need that at the moment of giving the get, all of those involved, the Eidim, the husband, the wife, the sofa, because the get has to be written, lishmoi, lishma, lishema, isha, etc. Very, very important. It's a serious business, right? You get it wrong, and she goes on and marries somebody else, the kids are mamzerim. This is really one of the areas which we take with the most greatest gravity. And at the moment of it being written, signed, witnessed, handed over, received, it must be absolutely crystal clear in the minds of all concerned that we need to be focused. This is it. This is real. This is happening. This is... And imagine there are some people who, either because of their lack of sophistication, of understanding of these halachic processes, it was really interesting. I was based in last week, here in this very room. Right. And I was a shliach for a get. It was a get shlichus to go to Eretz Yisrael. The guy's living here in Berlin, and his wife is in Eretz Yisrael, and we had to. But it's still, the get was written here. The get was actually written in my office, and then signed. And it takes an hour at least. Without going into the whole, maybe I'll see if I can arrange for you when it's not contentious to witness, see what goes on. It's absolutely fascinating. But the point being that the husband was a chiloni, he's not a religious at all, but it was very, very important that you have to get him into the right frame of mind, that he really takes what's going on seriously. And because we need to be utterly convinced that everything there is total cognizance, consciousness, and the clarity of understanding of all the processes, etc. And they take it seriously, because otherwise it's just not valid. So the Noda B'Yehuda was concerned that if one of these parties, who might be less than totally, sophisticated, then hears that we're going to do 2 gittin, because we're not sure whether your name is Chaim, or they're spelled like this or spelled like that. So we're going to do 2 gittin. And so if now it could be, we need one of them. We don't know which one we need, right? If the husband is less than absolutely, he needs to be 100% das on both of them. And so do the sofa, and so do the Eidim, and so do you understand, and the wife. And I think, you get it wrong, it's no good. And there's also a halachic problem potentially of, if retrospectively, can you retrospectively validate one of the gittin? Are we able to look at it backwards? Yesh breira b'doiraisa. Do we say, because klape shmaya, one of them is kosher, one of them is posel, right? So do I say that it works retrospectively, that now we have correctly identified and therefore one of them is valid and the other one isn't? Or do I need both of them to be valid in the sense of, in the terms of the consciousness of the people performing it? Does that work backwards or not? It's a bit more complicated than that. That's one of the chashoshes. So because of this, what did the Godel Ador do? Think about it. You've got the Noda B'Yehuda, chief rabbi of Prague, sitting in Beis Din, serious matter, husband or wife, sofa, Eidim, Shliach, I don't know. And they do this whole thing. By the way, it doesn't take 2 minutes. You have to wait for the ink to dry. You have to observe the writing of certainly of the first line of the get, and then you read it. And then you have to even be koina and makna the ink and the paper to the guy, to the sofa, and quiz the Eidim individually. There's a whole book, Seder Aget. It takes time. It takes time. So he does all of that, and then he calls them all back and says, Oy vey, I made a mistake. Do you know what humility, what anova you need? Think of it. Saying, I made a mistake, we've written. And he records, he says, I did this. Why did you do this? In order to make sure, because it's halachically, and make sure that there's gemiras das on both of the gittin.
If you, as soon as you say to Easter that you just disregard it.
No,
you disregard the old get, no?
So first of all, it's done. It's done. It's signed, sealed, and delivered. It's after it's been delivered, signed, sealed, whatever, delivered, it's given. And it could be, so then he will explain to them, but the way he did it, because he didn't want them then to say, oh, the first one might be okay, he would say, he's rather suffer the apparent humiliation. He says, V'chein ani noyeg in my Beis Din in Prague. Oh boy. Which is quite, just an amazing thing. I find, it made a big impact on me. The anova. All that matters is the halacha. So you think I don't know my stuff? You're amazing. Really, just found this amazing. Anyhow, how do we get onto this? I don't remember. Bekitza, but it's an important limit, very important limit. I'll tell you one other story with him quickly. The Noda B'Yehuda apparently had a terrible voice. And although he would serve as the chazan on Yom Neroim for at least one of the tefillahs, I don't know which one, but apparently he was not particularly tuneful, probably put it that way. And apparently his Mechalkel Chaim was particularly atonal, right? And there was a guy, a badchan. There was a guy who would go around and make a bit of money going around the chasnas copying him. His terrible Mechalkel Chaim. And that's how he made a bit of money. He would copy the Rav. It was his terrible Mechalkel Chaim. And eventually somebody said to this badchan, this guy, said, it's actually not very respectful. You're going around, you're making fun of the Rav at chasnas with whatever it is, how he... So the guy was very Tamimistic. He was very simple. Said, okay, good point. I'll go and ask the Rav. So he went to the Noda B'Yehuda and he said, Rabbi, this is what I do. I go around chasnas and I copy your absolutely awful Mechalkel Chaim, and people laugh and they give me money. So the Noda B'Yehuda said, so what's the problem? He said, yeah, but some people tell me that maybe it's not respectful. He said, tell me, do you make parnasa from it? He said, yes. He said, come, no problem. He took out a piece of paper and he wrote, Yechalkel Chaim Shaloi b'Mechalkel Chaim Shali. And he signed his name. He gave him a hechsher. Yechalkel Chaim Goynus, godless, that's a godel. Yechalkel Chaim Shaloi, he should have parnasa with the Mechalkel Chaim Shali, with my Mechalkel Chaim.
Then at least,
and he gave him a hechsher.
It has one benefit.
And he gave him a hechsher. That's the Noda B'Yehuda. That's the Noda B'Yehuda. That's the godless. Same Noda B'Yehuda, same anova. So that's Torah is it's an important thing. The Gemara says in Sukkah that Yurei Shamayim Dvarov Nishmaim. It's an incredible thing. Somebody has Yirei Shamayim Dvarov Nishmaim. His words are listened to and taken seriously. There's a certain indescribable quality in the process of transmitting Torah that it isn't always the most, and I've observed this in my life, it isn't always the most eloquent, charismatic. Even in this world of Sheker, there are people who are incredibly successful in managing to transmit Torah and Torah values, who are not gimmicky, cool, charismatic orators, but there is something, whether it's their warmth, whether it's the Yirei Shamayim, their integrity. There was a Rav recently in London who died, father of a chaver of mine, Dain Hul. This Rav Hul, who I knew well, he was the Rav in a suburb of London called Kingsbury. Kingsbury was kind of out in the middle, almost nowhere. It's way beyond Edgware. It's Kingsbury. The most incredible thing is that this Rav, who was their Rav in the United Synagogue, Kingsbury, Rav Hul, so he is in his kehillah, over his, 40 plus years of being a Rav there, raised Talmidim and B'nai Torah, L'Shemu L'Tiferes, Rabbi Naftali Schiff, loads and loads of serious B'nai Torah and Marbitzei Torah and Mechanchim, Rabbonim in their own right, were Talmidim of his and came from very middle of the road, traditional families, and he somehow managed, and he was not a charismatic in the classic sense. He was a quiet man. He just had some quality, and he had some zechus, and he managed to, he's an incredible dude. He died about 3 months ago. And his children are all Talmid Chachamim. One of them is a Dayan on the Federation in London. The other one's a big Talmud. They're big Talmud. Those are his kids, but his Talmidim were many Talmidim from many Mechanchim Rabbanim. Anyway, well, sorry, we will. I'm a little bit okay. We're out of time now, but tomorrow we'll finish off the Tshuva of Rav Avers, and then we'll still look at something from Rav Moshe, and maybe by then the photocopy might even be fixed, and we'll be able to, maybe hopefully Sammy will feel better by then.